I think it's probably fair to say that most potters during their pottery career will attempt at some time the challenging task of producing the elusive copper red glaze. It can vary from beautifully striking rich reds to dark reds, purples, soft pinks, and they can achieve many variegated effects, often resulting from the spontaneous activity of the firing and from the blending of various other metals with the glaze formula. Naturally, because of the redness of the glaze, they have been called sang de bœuf, which is French for ox blood glazes, and flambe glazes. This also comes from the French word for flame. And the words peach bloom also describe a soft pink colour derived from copper reduction. It seems that the Chinese potters first achieved these glazes as far back as the late Yuan dynasty and into the Ming dynasty. Because of the high temperatures required for glazing ceramics, colours are achieved by adding metallic oxides, which do not burn away, to the glaze formula. The most common of these are oxides of copper, iron, cobalt, manganese, chromium, nickel and tin. In oxidation conditions, glazes containing copper produce green through to blue tones, and in reduction conditions, red is the resultant colour. Copper red glaze is also called a transmutation glaze. The word transmutation in physics is used to describe the changing of one element into another, and in copper red glazes, cupric copper oxide is transmuted into cuprous oxide. The word transmutation is also a translation of the Chinese word yao bian, meaning the changing of colour of the glaze in the kiln. So what is reduction firing? In flame kilns, reduction can be created by reducing the air available for combustion to the point where no free oxygen is available in the kiln chamber, and the oxygen required for the flame is removed from the elements in the glazes that contain oxygen. Glaze formulas can be quite complicated, and if anyone is considering trying copper red glazing, there are many glaze recipes to be found on the internet. The copper red glaze formulas often contain a small quantity of other metals to enhance the colour of the copper red. In China and Japan, multiple kilns were built on hillsides, and they were called climbing kilns. In fact, the Chinese also called them dragon kilns because during the firings, with flames belching from various parts of the kilns, it must have looked like a dragon. But I've always maintained that in these kilns, reduction would be very easy to achieve because of the huge amount of smoke and heat and the lack of oxygen progressing through these kilns. I also think that copper reduction probably came about by accident, and after a lot of research and experimentation, it was discovered that it was the element of copper in the glaze that resulted in the various red colours. And this brings me to the next part of the story. We know that Portuguese traders imported Chinese pottery into Europe as early as the 16th century, so it stands to reason that eventually, but it wasn't until towards the end of the 19th century, that European and English potters began to experiment to try to discover how copper red glazes were made. Once again, it was by trial and error, and they discovered that the intense red colour came from the content of copper oxide in the glaze, and that this was induced by creating the reduction firing which starved the oxygen in the atmosphere of the high temperature firing. In England, Bernard Moore, at his Stoke-on-Trent pottery, was the first to perfect the high-fired copper red glazes. And here are some examples. Charles Noakes and other chemists of the Royal Dalton pottery, after much experimentation, were able to achieve a reliable form of copper red glaze, which they called flambe. And they exhibited versions of this flambe glaze in the 1904 St. Louis exhibition in the US. I am very fortunate to have two pieces of Royal Dalton flambe. One is this lovely guinea fowl, and the other piece is the large top by Charles Noakes, dated about 1926. And it is signed here on the foot by Noakes himself. They went on to expand their flambe glazes by adding other glazes and pigments and gilding to effect some extraordinarily different results. The Ruskin pottery in Birmingham was established by Edward Taylor in 1898, and his son William Howson Taylor also developed, after much experimentation, the large array of copper red glazes, some of which can be seen in this photograph, and they also won a prize at the St. Louis exhibition. In 1921, in his Burslem in Stoke-on-Trent factory, the well-known British potter William Moorcroft also developed a special flambe kiln, and he was able to control the firing during the vital transmutation process, and some striking results were achieved. In France, the prominent ceramic artist of the time, Theodore Deck, achieved the remarkable effect of copper red glazing with these two works shown here in the period around about 1888. Another French ceramic artist, Ernest Chaplet, produced this extraordinarily beautiful vase in 1891. Chaplet's exhaustive experiments in the kiln would cost him dearly. A firing accident led to his eventual blindness, ending his career as a potter. In despair, he destroyed all his notebooks containing his secret techniques. I wonder how many other potters have done that. And actually, I have just read that William Howson Taylor also did the same thing. And I'll just show a few more pieces from well-known overseas potters, Auguste Delaherche in France, and this another lovely stalking fox by Paul Minette, who worked for the Sèvres factory in France. And here are two more of his works. Pierre-Adrien Dalpeyret from Limoges in France, and that's around about 1900. Wilhelm Hauger from Sweden, a more contemporary potter, and Tom Turner from Illinois in the United States, and an Australian potter very versed in Copper Red Glazing, Marianne Williams, and a former colleague of mine in the Tweed Valley, the late Bob Connery. And of course there are many more. And I still have in my possession, after 52 years, one of the pots that I used when I was first experimenting with copper red glazes. It shows a reasonably good reduction, and on the bottom, my signature with batch number J1 and to date 1973. And here is that pot in the middle and two others from that same batch of test pots that I made back then. And these are two pieces that I produced at that particular time, and also this vase, which is now in the possession of my friend Malcolm. And then later on at my Tweed Valley studio in Tyalgum, I made these pieces. And once again, thank you for watching my videos, and please subscribe.